Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because this is the moment we've been preparing for months now. While everybody is euphoric over the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF options launch yesterday and the unheard of $1.9 billion traded, over 80% of which I believe was call buying, which is essentially investors betting on more upside, and the absolute euphoria surrounding MicroStrategy buying billions of dollars of Bitcoin as price nears all-time high, not to mention the insane stock performance we've seen. And this has everybody talking about their Bitcoin price targets and the inevitable 90% Bitcoin rally that's around the corner. But what not enough investors are talking about or noticing is the fact that the dollar index refuses to roll over. We have officially reached the major pivot level for the dollar index as it enters the risk-off region that has marked historical pivots for Bitcoin over the past 2 years. In November of 2022, the dollar index fell below that pivot of 106.50, and that marked the bottom for the bear market for Bitcoin. In October of 2023, the dollar index briefly entered above 106.50 but saw a big rejection, and that triggered a huge rally for Bitcoin that was further fueled by the ETFs going live. And today we find ourselves back at that major pivot level where we're going to find out if the dollar index is going to roll over, sparking a mania phase for Bitcoin and a massive alt season like what we saw in 2021 and 2017, or if we're going to see the dollar index break higher here, forcing Bitcoin to consolidate and perhaps even see a larger correction because of that risk-off signal. And this is mainly because the dollar index is the main driver of global liquidity. If the dollar is strong, then that means liquidity is down globally. But if the dollar is weakening against other currencies around the world, that means global liquidity is going higher. And Bitcoin can ignore global liquidity in the short term if there's a strong enough narrative like the ETF launch we saw earlier this year or the election outcome that we saw recently. But on larger time frames, global liquidity rises have been necessary for Bitcoin's major mania phases and alt season. So I'll be watching the weekly close very closely to see if the dollar index is going to break higher here or if it's going to roll over once again. And this is mainly going to be driven by the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. We only have 3 rate cuts priced in over the next 12 months. And our next major meeting is December. So based on the upcoming inflation and labor market data and what the market decides to price in based on Powell's comments, we're going to see whether or not the dollar index can roll over. And of course, we're going to wait to see if the Fed is going to announce quantitative easing or if they're going to keep QT going and they're going to keep reducing their balance sheet, which has been a major drag on global liquidity. As for traditional markets, we have been seeing the S&P 500 chopping around a bit here, perhaps by the pricing out of rate cuts over the next 12 months. So we'll wait to see if this is going to result in a larger correction or if it's just sideways consolidation. We have seen the S&P 500 correct before Bitcoin historically, and so far Bitcoin has been able to ignore this correction in the S&P 500, but we'll see how that develops between now and the end of the week. The other major signal I'm watching is the Tether dominance trendline, which has marked every major top for Bitcoin. It marked the top in the 2017 cycle. It marked the top in summer of 2019. Same thing in April 2021. Same thing in November of 2021. Recently in March 2024. And we're facing that trendline once again. And now Tether dominance can remain flat while Bitcoin goes up as long as the Tether supply is also increasing. But every single time we've tested this trend line historically, nobody has wanted to believe it, and it did end up resulting in a correction for Bitcoin and the crypto market as a whole. So I'm monitoring this very closely. A break in this trend line would likely require the dollar index to roll over aggressively here and Bitcoin as well as the altcoin market to rally a lot higher. But as of right now, we are sitting on that trend line while the US dollar index sits just above its major pivot level. As for market sentiment, we still find ourselves in extreme greed, and that's not surprising with all of the positive news we've been seeing recently. There's so much excitement surrounding the ETF launch. around what MicroStrategy is doing and around MicroStrategy's performance and all of the price targets that are being posted by technical analysts. So it's no surprise that we've been seeing extreme greed for over a week now. And this doesn't mean that markets have to correct tomorrow. It just means that we are overdue for a cool off. And we know that market sentiment is cyclical. So the same way we know greed is always going to come back when the market is fearful, we know that fear will come back one day when the market is extremely greedy. And speaking of extreme greed, open interest, which is a proxy for leverage in the system, is almost triple what it was at the April 2021 peak, even though price is only 40% above what it was back then. And we're seeing this in liquidations. Anytime there's a small 3 or 4% move by Bitcoin, we see hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidations. So I can only imagine what the liquidations would look like if we saw a 10% correction or 15% correction for Bitcoin. So for now, we'll see what happens. Based solely on price structure, we could expect Bitcoin to grind higher here, but the possibility of a pullback is increasing day by day, especially with all of the excitement and leverage we're seeing in the system right now. But in the medium term, I'm still expecting our cycle top to be in March to April of 2025, even if we see a pullback before that final move, but we'll have to continue monitoring this slowly as we approach those dates and keep an eye on Bitcoin's price action as we get closer and closer to 2025. And so far, this Q4 volatility has been right in line with our expectations and incredibly similar to what we saw in 2023. In 2023, we saw a huge rally in November, then sideways chop in December, but December was still green, which follows our trend of December following whatever happens in November. So perhaps after such an incredible November, we see either continuation in December or at the very least some sideways price action, but we'll have to see what the November monthly close looks like to try and forecast what comes next. As for my portfolio, I took some very small profits off my Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana positions and upped my cash from about 24% to about 27% because I would not forgive myself if I took zero profits when the dollar index entered the risk-off region I had been talking about for months now, and the Tether dominance trendline is being retested once again alongside extreme greed in market sentiment for over 1 week in a row. And even with all of those factors, it was so hard to press the sell button, even though it was just a tiny amount, because obviously sentiment is so bullish right now. There's all these narratives about the strategic reserve. There's all these narratives about MicroStrategy buying up all the Bitcoin and sending Bitcoin significantly higher. And usually the harder it is to take profit, the better sign it is that is a good time to do so. Just like how the best buying opportunities are the ones that are hardest to act on. And with Bitcoin trading in the very expensive region that I marked out in May of this year, I had to take at least some profits, no matter how small, just to lock in those gains and feel more comfortable riding it out with the rest of my holdings for hopefully much higher prices, especially with both Bitcoin and Solana being up over 100% year to date and significantly outperforming my benchmark of the S&P 500. And speaking of benchmarks, it's still crazy to me how much Bitcoin has been outperforming Ethereum. This chart looks so heavy, even with all of the strength we've seen from Bitcoin. Ethereum just keeps going down. And Ethereum holders have been beat up so bad that our optimistic price target now is 3.7K, which is only like 20% away from where Ethereum is currently trading. As for Solana, has looked incredible over the past 2 weeks, but we're seeing some early signs of weakness here. The Phantom Wallet's rank in the Apple App Store tends to be a good sentiment indicator, just like the Coinbase app is a good sentiment indicator for crypto as a whole. And with it taking second place and flipping apps like Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and Apple Fire TV, it's a clear sign that new retail participants are piling into Solana meme coins, especially if we look at the record fees that those Solana-based dApps have been bringing in based on meme coin trading. And it's crazy that the optimistic price targets for Solana now are around $400, which isn't even a 2x from where we are today. So we'll see how this weekly candle closes to try and forecast what comes next for Solana. I don't plan on making any other portfolio changes anytime soon. I still want to keep the majority of my spot holding exposure because I don't expect a cycle top until early next year, and I still think Bitcoin has more room to run in this expansion phase because government deficits are still increasing, which is a continuation of the trend we've seen over the past few years. And as long as government debt continues to increase, it has to get monetized eventually, which devalues the fiat currency. So I remain bullish on risk assets in the medium to long term because of that dynamic. But anyway, let me know what you expect next for the dollar index and Bitcoin. Is the dollar index going to break higher here, or will it roll over at this major pivot level once again? And will we finally get that mania phase that everybody has been waiting for, or are we going to see a correction in the short term? As always, thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.